I did a lot of trips out selling bronze throughout the world, and I used to travel. Used to be sponsored either by Standard Bank or by Zimtrade. And a friend of mine who worked for Zimtrade, we seemed to always travel together. And that was Morrison Cephalani. Morrison was a very good-looking African chap. Um, he wasn't always popular with government. He worked for Zisco, the steelworks, basically before. And he was selling, at one time, he was selling the steel for Zisco, but then he joined Zimtrade. But he was not particularly popular with the Mugabe government. They had opposing views on certain things. But well, I visited with him. We went to Nigeria, and we had a stand in Lagos. And that stand was, there's a circular place. Lagos was a town where the cars, the odd number plates are one day, and the even numbers of the car number plates are another day. So people ended up with two cars so that they could go out and drive. But the roads were shocking there. There was, when you were driving, you heard such a rattle of noise, and that rattle of noise was Coca-Cola tins that had been squashed by the cars, and it became a roar of the Coca-Cola tins. Now the potholes, we were driving. The driver who took us from our hotel to the trade fair was he took an alternate route to the main road going into Lagos. He took one of the back roads, and there the pothole was so deep that I was in the car that we were in. The hole was up to the windowsill of the car, and there was a truck alongside us, and it got two wheels in the pothole and two wheels above. So the angle of the vehicle of this big truck was at 45 degrees virtually, almost tipping over. It was quite frightening to drive in the potholes, and then you come out the other side. That was quite an amazing place, Lagos, for road traffic. There I went to in Lagos, there's a firm that did aluminium casting, continuous casting. Now, it was the same firm as Compcroft in Nairobi. So I knew them, and I went out to see their place. And they were continuous casting aluminium sheet. And they'd got a molten bath of aluminium, and it was pouring onto a roller. And the roller was big enough, it was cooling the aluminium, that it just enough so that it could be taken away as a sheet. It was really a remarkable process to see. The actual in Lagos, it was quite funny. The Africans there were of different tribes, and some of the women, not all, but they were very, very tall and wore very high hats, but beautiful girls, really, in comparison with the normal. They were very different. There were two different types of women there. And we said to Morrison, you can have the afternoon off, because Pen Owen was with me on that particular trip. And Penn says to me, we could take the afternoon off. And Morrison said, oh, no, I don't want to go with any of these girls. He says, I like girls from our part of the world. They've all got big bums. That's the comment he made. Then we went back. Penn did another trip. He went up further north this was a different time. He went to Jos, and that's a very, very Muslim part of Nigeria. But we never were very successful in Nigeria at all, because their industries were quite big, and we didn't seem to have an affinity with Nigeria. The other thing that happened in Nigeria, we had a very, very good African civil servant that was the leader of our team. I've gone and forgotten his name, but he became a member of Parliament, and he fell out with government. He ended up in prison for some reason or other. I forget what it was now. But what happened one night, we'd gone to a cocktail party at a big hotel, and when we got to this hotel, there was a prince, somebody there to meet us, who'd been to Zimbabwe. And as we walked up the steps, he introduced us to all his wives. And there was half a dozen women we had to shake hands with going up the steps of this hotel. Then when we left that hotel at night, we were all in a Peugeot. And it was a long base Peugeot with multi-seats in it. And there were about 10 or 12 of us in this Peugeot, very, very squashed up. And we got stopped by a police guard or troops, I don't know what they were. But they'd got pieces of electric cable, which they were prepared to beat hell out of us. But this African diplomat that we had, I've forgotten his name. And he was very, very strict, and he spoke very well with these policemen, and showed his diplomatic pass and all that. And everything went off smoothly. Thank the Lord for that, because they looked very aggressive, because the way they treated the police handled crowds in Nigeria wasn't the best of methods of handling crowds. Also, I went from there, at various times, I went to various places. The other place I went to was USA in, no, I've gone and forgotten, on the other side of the river into New Jersey. Newark. It was Newark. And I had a friend there who used to work for McKechnie's, and I've forgotten his name for a few minutes. He acted as an agent for all the Americas, basically, for us. And we would sell it through him, through to all sorts of funny places down the South America, all those sort of places, and we would make the different calls on some of these different firms. But Newark was, he was only about 2 miles away from the main airport, on a hill called Hillside, and he was just off the main road there. But it was quite funny. Paul was with me on one of the trips we did to the USA, and we had lunch. A machinery firm took us out to lunch at a particular restaurant, and we had a very nice meal there. Came out and got on with our business. I've forgotten the name of that particular merchant. We were doing quite good. We were doing very good business with, and in Newark, and then we did a trip around. I think at that time we went to a Radiator meeting in another part of the USA, down in the middle of the USA, the Grand Ole Opry. That's where we stayed, the hotel, the Opryland Hotel. And that was there Jeff Strigley from G&M Radiators there. All the radiator firms from all over the world were there, and they gave lectures on radiator manufacture, fluxes, all sorts of things. And it was an exhibition place where all the radiator firms of the world were displaying their products and the types of machinery they got for manufacturing of radiators. Now that was all in the days of copper and brass, before the aluminium came into being. And we then went back to Newark, and somebody else took us out for lunch. And Paul said to me, he says, you know, this place seems familiar. I don't know what it is, but we'd come into the same restaurant for the second time, but we'd come in a different door. And we didn't realize we'd been to the same restaurant twice until we walked out. That was quite fun. But we also, on that trip, we went down the river with Jeff and I, a party of us. I don't know how we come to be on the river in New York. That's between New Jersey and New York. We went there and we had a cocktail party on there. That was very nice. But I think those are all radiator people too. How we come to be there, I've forgotten. Now, I'm sorry about that. Now, the other places we went to, I went to India. But on my way to India, don't laugh, but I got hijacked in the Seychelles by Mad Mike Horn. Now, if you go into your computers and look for Air India hijacks, you'll see the whole story of Mike Hoare hijacking, attempting to, first of all, they were trying to, there was a group of South Africans trying to take over the government of the Seychelles. And it ended up as a shootout on the airport. Now, we came into land. I was on an Air India flight, and we came into land, and we had the most awful landing. But it was a miracle. There was a truck on the end of the runway, and I only found this out after the next day when I was coming back. But the aircraft landed on one wheel at an angle and bumped down the runway, bump backwards, forwards, as you might imagine, and eventually we landed. And what happened? The captain tried to radio through to the tower in the Seychelles, but he was getting no reply. But he had no reply on his way in, so he thought it was just an ordinary sort of state-of-the-art of machinery in those parts of the world. And Captain Sexana, he landed the aircraft and landed in the mist. So we were a little bit away from the main airport. But where we were, there were hand grenades and machine guns flying. And so every time a hand grenade went off, the aircraft rocked, the wings rocked. And so when lay in the aircraft, all the windows were shut. So there was no lights on, and we were completely in the darkness, and you didn't know whether to lay down on the seat to make a small target for the machine gunning, and that you didn't know what was happening, and or sit up straight. Well, after a while, some South African ex-army chaps or volunteers or whatever they were, and Rhodesians, they came aboard this aircraft, but they were all in the dark, so we hadn't got any clue as to what they were. Now, coming from Jersey, I thought they were all tourists being evacuated from the airport to get them out. But in actual fact, they were the people that had tried to take over the government of the Seychelles. Now they were taken, Mad Mike Hoare was taken over the aeroplane of Air India's, and we sat on there for about an hour and a half on the runway. And the Captain Six Honor, he walked the whole length of the runway to make sure there was nothing on the runway. That I only found this out afterwards. Then the aircraft eventually took off. Now, when we we took a long time taking off, as the aircraft was going along the runway, it was building up speed, and then these guys were shouting, up, I forget the words they use now, get up, get up, but it was all of them all shouted at the same time, and the plane, every time they shouted, the plane seemed to jump up into the air, and we eventually got into in the air, and they put the lights on, and I'd got two Rhodesians sitting next to me. One, I think, was from Sonoya, but they were all in the ex-South African Army or something like that. And they'd been made into a clique to take over. They'd come as a football team. But what happened when they went through customs, the customs officer opened one bag and he came across a machine gun. And that's when hell let loose there. One of these chaps got killed there, and he was put into the undercarriage of the aircraft. Well, I'd got some wine which I'd bought at the airport duty free, and these two chaps, being as they were Zimbos. I mean, I spoke to them, and I opened a bottle of wine, and we drank that bottle of wine. We were all, between the three of us, we drank that. And it was quite funny. At the very back, there was a chap an African who worked for the income tax department. And he was completely crippled. And he was a politician, really, I believe. And these so-called terrorists, they were feeding him beers at the back of the aircraft all the time. And another funny thing that happened there, it was a friendly hijack, if you might say, but they asked the stewardess if they could change a traveller's check. Well, usually hijackers don't ask to change a traveller's check, they just take the beers. But that was the sort of funny hijack it was. Well, we didn't know where the heck we were going to. These guys thought we might be going to Saudi Arabia. But we ended up down the Mozambique Channel. And these guys were bragging that the South African Air Force would immediately come fly alongside us and fly us into wherever they wanted us to land. Well, we arrived in Durban early in the morning, say 6 o'clock in the morning. And we arrived in Durban and we were parked right up by the petrol tanks. There's big tanks of fuel up there, but way away from the main airport. And the South African Army took at least an hour and a half before they even arrived to see what was going on. And these guys were bragging out how efficient they were, and the army was so inefficient at getting to the aircraft. What happened was they had two ranks surrounding the plane, the army did, one looking outwards, one looking inwards, of the two rings. And there must have been, I suppose, 60 or 70 guys all around the aircraft at that time. Well, after another period of time, it would have been about 11 o'clock, I suppose, 11, 12 o'clock, we got off the aircraft into the lounge of Durban Airport, and we were marooned there. for at least another couple of hours. I tried to phone Non-Ferrous Metalworks so they could phone Margaret to say I was all right. Now, Margaret had heard on the radio that the Air India had been hijacked, and so she got a problem with the doctor, and so she she didn't know which way to turn by the sound of it. It was really quite a problem for her. And what happened, they put us up in a hotel for the night. Can't tell you where the hotel was, but we were still isolated, and they put us on an aircraft the next day up to Johannesburg. And from Johannesburg, we flew up. I was sitting next to Captain Sexana on the plane that went from Durban to Johannesburg. The chap there, the Captain Sexana, told me that if we'd have hit that truck that was at the end of the runway in the Seychelles, it would have been another Tenerife sort of crash. And when I got out of the aircraft, the aileron had been knocked off the aircraft completely. The aileron had been knocked off the aircraft. So the aircraft had to be repaired before it could be take off again. So we eventually ended up in Nairobi, and there was another chap from Jersey, from St. Lawrence, on that flight, and he was an elderly gentleman. I think he must have been in finance or something like that. But I don't know his name. I wish I did. I don't know who was on what he was. But we ended up in Nairobi. Then we got a flight from Nairobi to Bombay, which had flown from Nigeria. It was the aircraft, Nigeria, Nairobi, Bombay aircraft, that we then were put on. So when we were on that aircraft, we were given gifts of all sorts of things, a bag with all sorts of goodies in it, and they even gave the Sikhs shaving cream, and the Sikhs don't shave, and they should have known better. But the Air India crew were absolutely fabulous during the hijack. I can't speak more highly of the girls, their capabilities, and the way they handle themselves in the situation that we'd found ourselves in. But the whole exercise was something that one has memories of. Where else had I been? I've been to Australia. We went there. We were there under the auspices of Standard Bank. And the Standard Bank had organised different places to go and meet and that was go to. We went to Melbourne, and Perth. We had 3 days in each. And wait to go. I've forgotten the name of the main place. The first place we started off, but the Zimbabwe main office, the consulate there, was the most beautiful sort of mushroom-shaped place. Gee, how much money the government must have spent on these different places that we went to. Now, I think that was in Nigeria, that particular one. I'm getting all my places mixed up. But when I was in India, we were met by all the dignitaries and the crew were treated with garlands and all that sort of thing. And I was interviewed there by various people, and one of the chaps who'd come to recruit labour for the mines, who was on the hijack, he said to me afterwards that he'd come with the idea that to recruit Indian labour would be a rather not a good thing for the country. But he said after the way that they'd handled the whole exercise, his mental capacity for the skills of the Indian went up 100%. And when I was there, there was a copper developments exercise going on in Bombay. And I said to them, well, that was the most important thing to me, was to go to the copper developments, to be involved with that. And they organized me to be a guest of the Indian. I was a guest of the Indian government, and they arranged for me to go to this copper developments meeting in Bombay. It was held in the Taj Hotel. I was in a cheaper hotel a little bit further around the corner, but it was wonderful, really, because I learned a lot, and I met a lot of people in the metal industry, and I think I was buying copper from a firm in Hyderabad, and then a copper strip for our radiators. And so it was a good introduction to the copper industry generally. But I wasn't able to sell any metal. There was always difficulty selling metal into India. I also went to, in Delhi, in Old Delhi. They have the fort there, and next door to the fort is their showgrounds. A huge, huge place. And all these different counties of India, they were all exhibiting there. It was a huge, huge showground. And all the different Indian, not tribes, that wouldn't be quite the right word, but they've got different uniforms, and all their uniforms, their saris were uniforms. You don't think of a sari as a uniform, but they were all dressed so beautifully, and it was really an exercise on itself. And to see the kids in Old Delhi playing in the streets cricket was quite interesting too. So India was quite a good place. Then I went up to Hyderabad at some time or other and met the people up there. And I met Sham's mom and dad there, and they lived quite close to where this firm were that I was buying copper from. And then they took me out to their factory, which was about 60 miles out of town. That was quite interesting too. Very different, but I learned all the way along. I was learning how to run my own factory from a lot of the things that I saw. The bank, I also went to Indonesia, but that was over a weekend. And really and truly, Indonesia was, I think I'd come from, where had I been to before? I think it must have been on the Indian trip. I went to Indonesia, and that was on the way possibly to Australia. And Indonesia was over a weekend, and there was a rally of sorts, and I've never seen a rally with so many people. Indonesia, Jakarta, is a very low-lying place, and if ever the seas came up, Indonesia would be in a terrible state, because most of the houses there seem to be on poles in the water. So they would be in a terrible state. I met some very nice people there um, um, in Indonesia, in the industry, but it wasn't selling. They weren't people that were buying from me. They were more people that wanted to sell to me than anything else. Um, no, that was Indonesia. No, I went to Korea. That was on another trip, and now it was a Korea Seoul. Now we bought steel from Korea, special high speed, high temperature steels. You know, the stuff 10% tungsten and special die steels for making dies for our extrusion. And I used to buy logs from them, this firm in Korea. All the Koreans seem to have the same name. And but we stayed again at a very, very close to the North Korea border. You could actually virtually see it from where the hotel we were in. And the road is so long in Korea and Seoul. It's a massive, at night when we came in, all the cars' headlights and red lights, tail lights of cars. It really was a fantastic sight just to see miles and miles of all these red lights. And where we were the guests of for a dinner party with one of the king's sons of Swaziland, a prince. I've forgotten his name now, but he was a prince. He was the 64th child of the prince from Swaziland, because the king of Swaziland, had a new wife every year. That was a custom of the country, and I still don't know if that still happens these days. But that happened in those days. But he was a very, very well-educated man, and he was the ambassador for Swaziland in Korea. But he was a very bright young man. So I think that covers a lot of the trips that I did all over the world. Margaret and I also, on one of our trips, we went down to not to Venezuela, where the canal is that goes across America. And that was quite an unusual place to go. And one of our customers there, I've forgotten his name, but we spent a day there. Again, I lost a coat in Newark. I bought a brand new coat and I'd forgotten, like a jerkin, and I hung it over the seat. But normally I don't wear these sort of things, and like just a jersey, being Zimbabwean. And I got up and left my brand new coat there. It had gone when my friend went to see if it was still there. But no. From there, we must have gone down to, we went to Brazil. We went to, I think we flew from Cape Town right across to Brazil, all in one flight. It was a very long flight. That was a very long flight that we did there. Margaret and I, we stayed at a hotel, and I'd got the name of the hotel I was staying at. And when the taxi stopped from the airport, I went up to a taxi and I said, "Look, I want to go to this hotel." And the taxi says, "Are you sure you want to go there?" And I said, "Yes." So he says, "Jump in." I jumped in the taxi, Margaret and I. And he drove around the block and came back to where we started. We started off outside the hotel, but I hadn't got the sense to look at the name of the hotel we'd stopped at. And I paid the driver because I laughed at it. I thought it was a huge joke that I should be so stupid. And that was one of those silly things. But again, where we were in Brazil was not the capital, but it was a huge city and the traffic was fantastic. But we didn't seem to be able to make contacts there. Um, the banks are usually very, very good at finding new contacts. Now, I went to Cyprus on one of my trips, and that trip I did via Dubai, because Ted Tucker was in Dubai, or Russell Keimer, and he picked me up from the airport, and I went in the airport. They'd got an exhibition in the airport. I hadn't met Ted yet, and I found a firm that I knew, that was an Australian firm, and it was an Australian trade fair in the airport. And so I went to this particular firm, left my card at their, because I was buying copper strip from them as well. And it was funny. The chap who was manning that stand, he wasn't there at the particular time I went there. He'd gone wandering around the other stands. And when he came back to the stand, he said to the guys, he says, "That's my next call in Zimbabwe. That's where I'm going next." He said, and he searched for me. They searched for me around the exhibition, but Ted and I, we must have gone off then, back to Russell Keimer. From Russell Keimer, I came back to Dubai and then flew to Baghdad. Oh, that was an exercise. Now, my travel agents had done all my tickets, and all my tickets were different ones to different places. And of course, I got my itinerary there. And when I got to Baghdad, the next trip I was going to was Israel from there, or at least it was part of my trip. And then they immediately, I was in real trouble with them. I was like so I tried to get my bags off the aircraft, and because the aircraft was and so as I could carry on, I looked down the board of where the next flight was, and the next flight was to Athens. So I quickly bought another ticket and got out of Baghdad to Athens, and then carried on my trip to Cyprus, and then through to Tehran. When in Cyprus, I'd got that was quite an exercise. When I arrived in Tehran, I stayed in Nicosia at the King George V's hotel, and next day I phoned the firm I was going to see. They were in not Famagusta. I'd got a customer in Famagusta. I'd also got customers in Greece, which I'd been to earlier. That was, but of course we were selling then from Radiator to Botswana, not from anywhere else. And we were supplying the American fleet with bronze from Athens. And we got customers in Athens that were selling our bronze. Then I went through to, as I said, to Cyprus. We got the customers there. And when I phoned my customer, they said, "Oh, take a taxi to, not Famagusta, that begins with L." So I said, "Take a taxi, 60 miles. And they said, "No, you get a taxi there. And about 10 of you all get in the taxi. So it's only $10 a piece for the taxi ride." So I went down, and it was on a Saturday morning. And this office at Oh, I know it so well. But the lady there, who was my customer, and she said, "Well, look, we got a big party here tonight. Why don't you go and get your baggage from the hotel in Nicosia, come back and book in the hotel here?" So they booked me into the hotel in the, no, it begins with an L. So I got back in another taxi, back up to Nicosia, and then back down again, booked into the hotel where I was staying. And it was the same hotel as the party was in. And I went down. I was wearing a Zimbabwe tie, with the Zimbabwe bird on. And I'm sitting in the bar before the party started, and there was another chap from Zimbabwe, and he said, "You're from," and he was a hotel owner near the cathedral and up near Kariba. He owned both of those hotels, this particular chap. And that night, it was a fantastic party that they put on. And all the hoteliers from all over the world were there. And what they were trying to do, this woman was she seemed to be a part of a team. They were trying to make this particular town the center of tourism for Cyprus, because Cyprus was split in two. They had the Green Line and the Turkish. I was staying in the Greek side, and the Turkish side was the other side of the town, so you couldn't go across. It was like a military zone, the other side of Cyprus. And yeah, it was quite some. And I tell you, Lord Forty was in amongst those, and he built a hotel in sorry, I've forgotten the name of the town. But I went the next day. They had like an exhibition there. I was told about it, and I went to this place, and it ended up that this place I went to ended up as a prison camp. It was like a games park. It was a huge place. A bit like Bulawayo's arena at the trade fair, where they played football and all sorts of games and that. And it was a sports sort of thing I saw there. But no, I've forgotten the name of that. Then from there, I'm not too sure where I went. I went to Tehran, and I arrived in Tehran, and it was a public holiday, which was a damn nuisance. And I stayed in I got a hotel. It was very Iranian sort of place, and because it was a public holiday, I could do nothing. So I walked the whole length of this very long road, which was the name of the Shah, going straight for miles and miles. I walked up there, and the next day I met my customers that was right opposite the souk. So I went in the souk, and I bought Margaret a Nefertiti. That's where I bought that from years ago. And my customer took me out to lunch at the French, not a French consul, it's a French international hotel, sort of. All the international people go there. But the lady, I couldn't tell you her name. I think they must have been Jewish. But she was dressed in the most beautiful green leather coat. Well, leather, I think it was, and leather boots, and leather hat, all everything matched beautifully, most expensively dressed. And they took me to lunch at this place, and it was near the American embassy in Tehran. Um, all the taxis there were uh, were yellow, and they were, if I remember rightly, there was Hillmans and Morris Oxfords with the shaped bonnets. But that's most of my travelling all over the world that I did, and we sold hundreds and hundreds of tons of bronze worldwide. Um, we were a big exporter of bronze throughout the world. We didn't sell so much brass out. Most of our brasses were used for locks. We would sell to locally to bolt manufacturers, to rowbolts, and the alloy die casting, where they used to do the door handles and all that for the windows, all that. We did all the brass and that. The biggest job I did in Zimbabwe, a radiator, a heat exchanger, was for Kariba Power Station. Now that was so big, it stretched the whole width of the cavern, and the cavern of Kariba is huge, so it must have been at least 80 feet wide, and the radiator there was the whole width, and because I could only do, I did it in sections, they were about 12 foot high, and there was one above the other. So it was about 24 foot high and across the whole cavern. Now, it didn't matter if it leaked because they were running water over the cooling. That was so as to humidify the cavern. But it was one of the biggest jobs that I ever did in Zimbabwe. We used to make a lot of heat exchangers at Radiator and Tinning. We made all sorts of condensers. We made them for all the hospitals. We were a wonderful firm, Radiator and Tinning. It was an absolute gem of a firm. We got so much specialized machinery, and the woman said that we were old-fashioned. All right, to a degree we were old-fashioned, but our Mark III equipment is still used today all over the world. And our pack construction radiators, they are used all over the world. We couldn't get into aluminium manufacture of radiators, partly because the oven, aluminium doesn't solder as we know it. It is, there's a firm called Solvay in Belgium who make a flux, which the flux is a special flux which coats onto the aluminium strip, and the flux melts. You have to buy a special aluminium where the aluminium has got like a coating of something where the flux can actually stick to. And that's how the aluminium radiators, the first aluminium radiators that were made, were, if you got a leak in them, virtually the radiator was scrap. You couldn't really repair it. You could only use polyester resin, sort of two-piece resins to repair the radiators. Eventually they did make materials that you could repair, but it was never very satisfactory. But aluminium took over to a large extent in the because of its lightness, and the manufacturers of motor cars were all aiming to get lighter and lighter and lighter, and all the original radiators that were made in aluminium were more the oil cooler radiators, which were very small. So there wasn't a big, usually in the air conditioning side of the cars. But the reason I didn't go into the aluminium side was when you use copper, when you got a copper film, that aluminium and copper, if you get a speck of aluminium in copper, it causes a form of erosion in the copper. So you mustn't use any aluminium. You must keep aluminium completely away from your copper products. Otherwise, you end up with major problems. Um, it was quite funny. The lady that sold up the firm, she said to me, she said, your place was bloody filthy. She says, I had to carry away tons and tons and tons of dirt. And I said, yes, madam, that was copper-bearing ash. That was worth £100,000. And do you know, if only I'd gone out, been able to go out to Zim and sort out those sort of silly things, that could have paid all the debt off to the power station that we owed them. It was really the electricity bill that ruined Radiator and Tinning. And I look back on that, we had a billet heater, which I'd paid a lot of money for, and it should have been sold to United Spring or Aluminium Industries individually. And but that billet heater, when you switched it on, it actually almost bent the cooling towers because it was so big a drawer of electricity. But when you get a bill for the electricity is sold by they have a special metering system, which is it measures the electricity you use in 30 minutes on a clock. And if you swing that clock, whatever that clock goes to, that is what you pay for every unit of electricity for the rest of the month. Now, I think that what happened, that our chaps got an order for something, and they used the billet heater maybe for an hour, and we ended up paying $75,000 for the electricity, and it was due to the fact that they'd actually used the billet heater without using any electricity, basically, for the rest of the month. And so every unit we used was charged out at that very, very high price. So I believe that we should have got a credit note or something back from the ZESA for the juice that if we'd seen the graph of how we'd used electricity for that. Now, Radiator and Tinning had a lot of transformers. We had two 500 kilowatt transformers, which were full of oil, and there was also 500 kilowatt transformers in various places. We got two of those in the old factory, which was part of home build. We'd also got other transformers and on the other side, underneath the offices that were up where the metals offices were, there was a switchboard there. We were very fortunate. It was a different voltage, and they thought we nearly cooked a chap there. Very fortunately, he was very, very lucky because it was alive with 550 volts or some. Look, I'm not too sure what I'm saying now, but it was a very, very, very dangerous thing that happened there. But that particular electrician went to work for Settling in Guello, and he, I think, got cooked again, very badly burnt again. Um, this is the trouble, that you've got to watch electricity very carefully, what you do, because we've got the two voltages, 550 and the 380, within the same factory. We those we bought. I don't know if I've mentioned this, but we got two 500 horsepower 550 motors, which we'd bought with the transformers, which had all come from Zambezi sugar estates, and they were drawing water off the Zambezi River for the sugar estates. So they were huge motors. And the scrap value of Radiator and Tinning, it was a scrap. Do you know, I've actually, when they sold Radiator and Tinning, they got them $350,000 for it, or something like that. And really and truly, the scrap value of all electric cables under the ground and all over the pipe work that we got there was worth far more than the when I look back, and because I knew we got heavy cables all underground, and it was a scrap merchant's birthday party. It must have been wonderful for them, and because it was so badly advertised by the auctioneer. Look, I'll have to let that go. All right, I must stop now, eh?